Colonel Graves slammed his fist on the table and laughed. He looked straight at Sergeant Elena Cruz and said, "You want me to cancel a mission because a desk girl had a bad dream?" The room erupted in laughter. Every officer, every man in that briefing room turned her into a joke. And 48 hours later, 480 Marines rolled straight into a kill zone that Elena had begged them to avoid. They were pinned down, bleeding, dying, calling for help that wasn't coming. But what Colonel Graves didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that the woman they laughed at was already on a ridge with a rifle, and she was about to become the deadliest thing in that valley. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel right now and follow Elena's journey all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Staff Sergeant Vega had seen a lot of things in 14 years of service. He had buried friends. He had carried men who couldn't walk. He had written letters to mothers he would never meet. But he had never seen anyone get shut down the way Elena Cruz got shut down that morning. It started at 0600. The forward operating base was already hot, and the briefing room smelled like sweat and bad coffee. Captain Oakes stood at the front, pointing at a map pinned to the wall. He was talking fast, the way officers talk when they want to sound important. "Operation Clear View," Oakes said. "Full battalion push through Cara Basin. Intelligence confirms minimal resistance. We sweep, we secure, we go home." Vega sat in the second row. He didn't like it. Cara Basin was narrow. Tight walls on both sides. One road in, one road out. Any grunt with half a brain could see it was a bottleneck. But Vega kept his mouth shut because that's what you did when captains talked. Elena Cruz was not in the second row. She was standing in the back near the door, holding a stack of comm reports she had been told to deliver. She wasn't supposed to be in this briefing. She wasn't supposed to hear any of this. But she heard every word, and something inside her turned cold. "Sir," she said. The room didn't react. Nobody turned around. "Sir," she said again, louder this time. Captain Oakes stopped mid-sentence. He looked over the heads of 40 men and found her. His face changed the way faces change when someone steps where they don't belong. "Sergeant Cruz, this is a tactical briefing. Your comms, drop the reports on my desk and step out." "Sir, I've been monitoring chatter on the eastern frequency for 3 weeks. There's been a significant increase in coded transmissions originating from grid squares that overlap directly with Cara Basin. The pattern is consistent with coordinated staging." Silence. Not the good kind of silence. Not the kind where people are thinking. The kind where people are deciding how to embarrass you. A lieutenant named Hargrove leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Did the radio girl just try to brief us on enemy movements?" Laughter, not a lot, but enough. Elena didn't flinch. "Sir, I've plotted the transmission origins on a separate map. If I could show you the overlay, you'd see that the concentration points correspond to elevated positions along both ridge lines of Cara Basin. That's not random. That's a kill box." Oakes stared at her for a long time. Then he said, "Cruz, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but intelligence has already cleared this corridor. We've got satellite imagery, we've got drone passes, and we've got local assets confirming the area is soft. What you're hearing on your radio is probably goat herders arguing about water rights." More laughter, louder this time. Elena's jaw tightened. She looked at Vega. Vega looked away. "Now, unless you've got those comm reports," Oakes said, "I'd like to finish this briefing before the sun melts us all." Elena set the reports on the nearest table. She turned around and walked out. The door closed behind her, and inside that room she became a punchline. A story that officers would tell over dinner. The comms girl who thought she was a tactician. But Elena didn't go back to her desk. She went to the comm tent and pulled every intercept from the past 21 days. She laid them out on the floor in chronological order. She cross-referenced timestamps with known patrol movements. She mapped out frequencies to grid coordinates using a method she had taught herself from a signals intelligence manual she had stolen from a supply closet 2 years ago. And what she saw made her hands shake. It wasn't just chatter, it was orchestration. Multiple cells coordinating movement times, referencing terrain features that matched Cara Basin exactly. One transmission, partially decoded, used a phrase that translated roughly to "the mouth swallows." The mouth swallows. Cara Basin's entrance was called the Mouth by locals. Elena knew this because she had spent 6 months learning the regional dialect from an interpreter named Tariq, who everyone else ignored because he stuttered. She grabbed her findings and went to find someone who would listen. The first person she found was Lieutenant Hargrove. He was eating an energy bar outside the motor pool. "Lieutenant, I need 5 minutes. Cruz, I don't have 5 seconds. They're going to hit the convoy inside the basin. I have proof." Hargrove looked at her the way you look at a dog that won't stop barking. "You have radio noise. Intelligence has cleared it. Drop it. Intel is wrong. Then take it up with Intel." "I tried. They told me to stay in my lane." "Then stay in your lane, Cruz. That's not advice. That's an order." He walked away. Elena stood there for a moment holding her papers, watching him go. Then she went to the next person, and the next, and the next. Master Sergeant Doyle told her she was paranoid. Gunnery Sergeant Welch told her she was out of her depth. A warrant officer whose name she didn't even know told her to go get some sleep. Nobody listened. Not one person. And with each rejection, Elena felt something shift inside her. Not anger, not frustration, something deeper, something that lived in the part of her brain that had been trained to read a battlefield before she was ever allowed to touch a rifle. See, what nobody in that base knew, what Elena had never told anyone because nobody had ever asked, was that before she was reassigned to communications, she had been one of the top marksmen in her training class. Not top female marksman, top marksman, period. She had qualified expert on every weapon system the Marines offered. She had been recommended for advanced sniper training by an instructor who called her the most naturally gifted shooter I've seen in 20 years. But the recommendation had been lost, or buried, or ignored. Elena never found out which. All she knew was that one day she was on track for a career that matched her talent, and the next day she was sitting behind a radio console logging frequencies and filing reports that nobody read. She had accepted it. For a long time she had accepted it. She told herself the system worked. She told herself her time would come. She told herself that being invisible didn't mean being useless. But standing in that desert holding papers that could save 480 lives, being told to go get some sleep, Elena Cruz stopped accepting it. She went back to the comm tent. She sat down. She closed her eyes. And she made a decision that would either end her career or define it. The convoy was scheduled to roll out at 0400 the next morning. That gave her 22 hours. She started planning. First, she needed a rifle. Her service weapon was an M4 standard issue, fine for close quarters, but worthless at the distances she would need. She needed a precision weapon, something that could reach out to 1,000 meters and still put rounds inside a dinner plate. There was an M40A5 in the armory. She knew it was there because she had seen it 3 days ago when she had delivered a comm report to the armory sergeant. It was sitting on a rack unchecked, assigned to a sniper team that had rotated out 2 weeks prior. Nobody had signed for it. Nobody was looking for it. Elena waited until 2200 hours. The armory sergeant, a man named Briggs, went to the latrine at the same time every night. She had noticed this because noticing things was what Elena did. It was what had made her a great shooter, and it was what had made her a great signals analyst, and it was what had made her see the trap in Cara Basin when everyone else saw a routine sweep. She was inside the armory for 4 minutes. She took the rifle, 2 boxes of match-grade ammunition, a spotting scope, and a ghillie hood that was stuffed behind a locker. She wrapped everything in a poncho liner and carried it back to her rack like she was carrying laundry. Nobody saw her. Nobody asked. That night, while 480 Marines slept, Elena Cruz sat on her bunk and zeroed the scope by memory. She couldn't fire the weapon. She couldn't confirm the zero. She would have to trust her knowledge, her training, and the fact that match-grade ammunition from the same lot tends to perform consistently. She studied the map of Cara Basin until she could close her eyes and see every contour line, every elevation, change every possible fighting position. She identified 3 ridgeline positions that offered clear lines of sight into the basin floor. She calculated distances. She accounted for wind patterns based on seasonal data she had memorized months ago because she memorized everything. At 0300, 1 hour before the convoy rolled out, Elena packed her gear. She put on her boots, her plate carrier, her helmet. She filled 3 canteens. She packed 6 MREs, her medical kit, and 20 extra rounds beyond what she could carry in her magazine pouches. She left the base through a gap in the wire near the burn pit. She had noticed the gap 2 months ago and had reported it. The report had been filed and forgotten like everything else she reported. The terrain between the base and Cara Basin was 8 kilometers of open desert broken by shallow wadis and rock formations. Elena moved fast. She wasn't trying to be tactical. She was trying to beat a clock. The convoy would reach the basin entrance by 0630. She needed to be on that ridge before they arrived. She ran when the ground was flat. She walked when the ground was broken. She didn't stop to rest. She didn't stop to drink. She didn't stop for anything. And as she moved through that darkness, she thought about her father. Hector Cruz had served 24 years in the Marine Corps. He had earned a Silver Star in a war nobody talked about anymore. He had taught Elena to shoot when she was 11 years old, standing in a field behind their house in Odessa, Texas, using a bolt-action .22 that he had bought from a pawn shop for $40. Breathing is everything, he had told her. Your body wants to shake. Your hands want to tremble. But if you control your breath, you control the bullet. And if you control the bullet, you control the outcome. Hector had died of pancreatic cancer when Elena was 19. She had enlisted 3 weeks after his funeral. Not because she wanted to honor his memory, because she wanted to finish what he had started. She wanted to be the Marine he had always believed she could be. And now running through the desert in the dark, carrying a stolen rifle to stop a massacre that nobody believed was coming. Elena felt her father's voice in her chest like a second heartbeat. Control the breath, control the bullet, control the outcome. She reached the base of the eastern ridge line at 0545. The climb was steep, loose rock and sand, and her legs were already burning from the 8-kilometer sprint. But she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Every minute she wasted was a minute closer to the convoy entering the basin. She found her position at 0615, a natural depression behind a cluster of boulders 300 meters above the basin floor, with a clear sight line that stretched nearly 2 kilometers in both directions. It was perfect. It was exactly where she had plotted it on the map. She set up the rifle. She adjusted the scope. She laid out her ammunition in neat rows beside her rounds facing the same direction because Hector had taught her that consistency in small things created consistency in big things. Then she pulled out her spotting scope and glassed the opposite ridgeline, and her blood went cold. They were already there. She counted them methodically the way she counted everything. Fighting positions, dug in, camouflaged, spread across 800 meters of the western ridge in overlapping fields of fire that would turn the basin floor into a killing ground. She counted RPG teams. She counted machine gun nests. She counted mortar positions. She counted and counted, and when she was done, she realized the intelligence assessment hadn't just been wrong. It had been catastrophically, fatally, unforgivably wrong. There were over 200 fighters on that ridge, organized, disciplined, waiting, and the convoy was 15 minutes away. Elena picked up her radio. She switched to the battalion tactical frequency. She keyed the mic. Warhorse Main, this is Ghost 17. Emergency traffic. How copy? Mod static. Warhorse Main, Ghost 17. I have eyes on Cara Basin. Enemy positions confirmed along the western ridgeline. Estimate 200 plus fighters in prepared defensive positions. RPGs, heavy machine guns, mortars. The basin is a kill zone. Recommend immediate halt of the convoy. How copy? Static. Then a voice, irritated, clipped. Ghost 17, this is Warhorse Main. Identify yourself. You are not on the approved net roster. Warhorse Main, I am Sergeant Elena Cruz Communications Section, and I am telling you there are 200 armed fighters waiting to destroy that convoy. You need to stop them now. A pause. Then the voice came back colder than before. Cruz, you are unauthorized on this frequency. Clear this net immediately. That is a direct order. Sir, if that convoy enters the basin, they will die, all of them, every single one. Cruz, clear this net. The radio went silent. Elena set the handset down. She looked through her scope at the western ridge. The fighters hadn't moved. They were patient. They were professional. They had done this before. She looked south toward the basin entrance. Dust. A thin brown line rising against the pale sky. The convoy was coming on. 480 Marines, sons, daughters, husbands, wives, friends, 20-year-olds who had joined because they wanted college money, 30-year-olds who had joined because they didn't know what else to do, 40-year-olds who had joined because this was the only family they had left, 480 people who had no idea they were driving into a grave. Elena Cruz settled behind her rifle. She pressed her cheek against the stock. She placed her finger outside the trigger guard, and she waited. Not because she was hesitant, not because she was afraid, because Hector Cruz had taught her that the first shot is the one that matters most. You don't rush it. You don't waste it. You make it count, because once that trigger breaks, the whole world changes and there's no taking it back. The dust cloud grew larger. She could hear the engines, now low and rumbling, echoing off the basin walls. Elena breathed in. The first vehicle appeared at the mouth of the basin. Elena breathed out. On the western ridge, a fighter stood up and raised his arm. The signal. Elena Cruz put her crosshairs on his chest, and the world held its breath. Elena squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. The round crossed 1,014 meters of open air in less than 2 seconds. The fighter on the western ridge, the one with his arm raised, the one about to give the order that would kill 480 Marines, dropped straight down like God had cut his strings. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. The basin was silent. The convoy was still rolling. The fighters on the ridge were frozen, staring at the spot where their commander had been standing. Then the world exploded. They fired anyway. Without the signal, without coordination, without their leader, they opened up with everything they had. RPGs screamed across the basin and slammed into the second and fourth vehicles simultaneously. The lead Humvee, already past the narrowest point, took a burst of heavy machine gun fire that punched through the doors like they were made of paper. A mortar round landed between the fifth and sixth trucks and sent shrapnel ripping through canvas and flesh. Inside the kill zone, 480 Marines went from driving to dying in the span of 3 seconds. But Elena had bought them something. 3 seconds of confusion. 3 seconds where the enemy fired without purpose, without sequence, without the layered precision that would have destroyed the entire convoy in a single coordinated volley. 3 seconds that meant the difference between a massacre and a fight. Elena chambered another round. She found her next target through the scope. A 2-man RPG team reloading behind a rock formation. She put the crosshair on the loader's chest and fired. He went down. The gunner turned confused, searching for a threat he couldn't see. Elena chambered again and fired. The gunner collapsed over his weapon. 3 shots, 3 kills, 11 seconds. On the basin floor, Staff Sergeant Vega was screaming. Not words, just sound. Pure adrenaline forcing itself out of his lungs as he threw open the door of his vehicle and rolled into the dirt. A burst of machine gun fire stitched the ground 6 inches from his face. He crawled behind the rear wheel and pulled his rifle up. "Contact left, contact right, both ridge lines," he shouted into his radio. "We are in a crossfire. I say again, we are in a crossfire." Nobody answered. The radio was a wall of static and overlapping voices, every squad leader screaming at once, every frequency jammed with panic. Vega grabbed the Marine next to him, a kid named Dawson, who was 19 years old and had been in country for 6 weeks. Dawson's eyes were the size of dinner plates. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't grip his weapon. "Dawson, look at me." Dawson didn't look. He was staring at the burning vehicle 20 meters ahead, at the shapes moving inside the flames that weren't moving anymore. Vega grabbed Dawson's face with both hands and turned it toward him. "Look at me, Marine. You are not dying here today. Do you understand me?" Dawson blinked. Something came back into his eyes, not courage, not calm, just enough focus to function. "Get behind that tire and put rounds on that ridgeline. I don't care if you hit anything. You shoot and you keep shooting. Can you do that?" "Yes, Staff Sergeant." "Then do it now." Dawson moved. Vega turned back to the chaos and tried to make sense of it. The convoy was spread across 600 meters of basin floor. At least 3 vehicles were burning. 2 more were disabled, their tires shredded, their engines dead. Marines were scattered everywhere, some behind vehicles, some behind rocks, some lying in the open where they had fallen and hadn't gotten back up. And the fire from the ridge lines was relentless, constant, overwhelming. But something was wrong with it. Vega couldn't figure out what at first, but something about the enemy fire pattern didn't match what he expected from a coordinated ambush. There were gaps. Sections of the western ridge that should have been pouring fire into the basin were silent. Positions that should have been active were dead. He didn't know why. Not yet. 600 meters above him, Elena Cruz knew exactly why. She was working the western ridge like a surgeon. Methodical, precise. Every shot targeted the highest value assets she could identify. Machine gun teams first because they were doing the most damage. then RPG teams because they could destroy vehicles, then mortar teams because they could hit Marines behind cover. She fired her 7th round and watched a machine gunner slump forward over his weapon. His assistant tried to push the body aside and take over the gun. Elena chambered and fired her 8th round. The assistant fell beside the gunner. 16 seconds between shots. Breathe, find, range, wind, squeeze, follow through, repeat. Hector's voice was in her head now, steady and calm. The same voice that had talked her through her first deer at 12 years old, the same voice that had told her she was going to be something special. Don't think about all of them, mija. Think about the one, just the one in front of you. Elena thought about the one, then the next one, then the next. 9 shots. 10. 11. On the basin floor, Captain Oakes was trying to establish command. He had been in the 3rd vehicle when the ambush started. His driver was dead. His radio operator had taken shrapnel in both arms and was bleeding badly. Oakes had grabbed the radio handset himself and was trying to reach battalion headquarters. Warhorse Main, this is Warhorse 6 troops in contact grid follows. He rattled off the coordinates. We are inside Cara Basin and we are taking fire from both ridge lines. Multiple casualties. I need air support and I need it now. The response came back, scratchy and distant. Warhorse 6. Warhorse Main, copies troops in contact. Be advised, closest air asset is 47 minutes out. Can you hold? Oakes almost laughed. 47 minutes. In 47 minutes, they would all be dead. Negative, Warhorse Main. We cannot hold for 47 minutes. We are in a kill box with no cover and no maneuver space. I need something now. Warhorse 6, we are working the problem. Stand by. Stand by, the 2 most useless words in the English language when people are bleeding. Oakes threw the handset down and looked at his radio operator. Ramirez, can you still work? Ramirez was gray-faced, both arms wrapped in gauze that was already soaking through. I can talk, sir. Can't do much else. Get on the squad net and tell every squad leader to consolidate behind the heaviest vehicles. We're going to form a perimeter and fight from here. Sir, we can't stay here. They've got mortars dialed in. I know what they've got, Ramirez. Just send the message. Ramirez keyed the radio with hands that were slippery with his own blood. Oakes picked up his rifle and moved to the front of the vehicle. He peeked around the bumper and immediately pulled back as a burst of fire chewed the metal where his head had been. But in that half-second glimpse, he saw something that didn't make sense. On the western ridge, he could see at least 4 fighting positions that were silent. No muzzle flashes, no movement, just bodies draped over weapons. Vega? Oakes shouted across the gap between vehicles. Vega, are you alive? Alive, sir. Are any of our snipers up on that ridge? Negative, sir. We didn't deploy any snipers. We didn't think we needed them. The bitterness in Vega's voice was sharp enough to cut. Everyone knew what he meant. Intelligence had said the basin was clear. No snipers needed, no overwatch required, just a nice easy drive through a nice easy valley. Then who the hell is shooting on that ridge? Oakes said. Neither of them had an answer. Elena did. She had fired 14 rounds now, and 13 of them had found their target. She had neutralized 4 machine gun positions, 2 RPG teams, and a mortar crew that had been dropping rounds with terrifying accuracy on the center of the convoy. The western ridge, which should have been an unbroken wall of fire, now had holes in it, gaps that the Marines below could use. But Elena was running into a problem. The eastern ridge. She had chosen her position on the eastern side deliberately because the western ridge held the majority of the enemy's heavy weapons. But there were fighters on the eastern ridge too behind her below her, and they were starting to notice that something was wrong. She heard voices, close, maybe 200 meters down the slope, shouting in a language she partially understood from her months of studying with Tariq, the interpreter. Someone is shooting from the east side, find them. Elena's stomach clenched. She was exposed. Her position was good for shooting across the basin, but it was terrible for defending against anyone climbing toward her from behind. She had no rear cover, no escape route, no backup. She had known this when she chose the position. She had accepted it. But accepting death as a concept and hearing the men who are going to kill you climbing up the rocks behind you are 2 very different things. Elena made a choice. She couldn't deal with the fighters below her and continue suppressing the western ridge at the same time. She had to pick one, and if she turned around to fight the men behind her, the Western Ridge guns would come back online, and the Marines in the basin would be slaughtered. So she didn't turn around. She stayed on the rifle. She found her next target on the Western Ridge, a mortar team that had just set up in a new position. She fired. The round hit the base plate and ricocheted into the gunner's leg. He fell. His loader scrambled for cover. 15 rounds. 15 seconds of life she had just given to the Marines below. The voices behind her were closer now. She could hear boots on loose rock. She could hear the metallic sound of weapons being readied. Elena reached down to her plate carrier and pulled a fragmentation grenade from her pouch. She had taken 2 from the supply tent before she left the base. She hadn't told anyone, just like the rifle, just like everything else. She pulled the pin, held the spoon for 2 seconds, and threw it over her shoulder without looking. The grenade bounced twice on the rocks below her and detonated, screaming, then silence. Elena was back on the rifle before the echo faded. She found another target, fired, chambered, found another, fired. On the basin floor, the tide was shifting, not turning, not yet, but shifting. The Marines were starting to fight back with something they hadn't had 5 minutes ago: hope. Vega noticed it first. The fire from the Western Ridge was weakening, not stopping, but weakening. Positions that had been hammering them with sustained bursts were going quiet one by one, and the pattern was moving from south to north along the ridge, like someone was walking a line of death across the enemy positions. "Somebody's up there," Vega said to Corporal Hayes, who was crouched beside him, bleeding from a cut above his eye. "Somebody's on that eastern ridge, and they're picking those guys apart." "Who?" Hayes asked. "I don't know. I don't care, but whoever it is, they're buying us time, and we're wasting it." Vega made a decision. He keyed his radio and cut through the noise on the squad net with a voice that left no room for argument. "All squads, this is Vega. Enemy fire is weakening on the Western Ridge. I need fire teams to start bounding toward the north end of the basin. We push through the gap or we die here. Move now." It wasn't an authorized order. Vega was a staff sergeant. Captain Oakes was the commanding officer. But Oakes was pinned down 200 meters to the south, and in combat, the man who acts is the man who leads. Marines started moving. Not all of them. Not at once. But enough. Fire teams began leapfrogging from vehicle to vehicle, moving north, moving toward the narrow gap at the far end of the basin, where the walls opened up and there was room to maneuver. And every time a new machine gun tried to pin them down, it went silent within 30 seconds. Whoever was up on that ridge had eyes on the entire battlefield, and they were making decisions faster than the enemy could adapt. Elena was on her 23rd round now. Her shoulder ached. Her right eye was swollen from the constant pressure of the scope. Her mouth was so dry that her lips had cracked and she could taste blood. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Because every time she looked through that scope, she saw Marines moving, alive, fighting, surviving. And she knew that the moment she stopped shooting was the moment they started dying again. The fighters behind her made another push. This time she heard the crack of rounds passing over her head. Close. Too close. They had found her general position and they were firing blind, hoping to get lucky. Elena rolled to her left, putting a boulder between herself and the incoming fire. She lost her shooting position. For 15 seconds, she couldn't see the Western Ridge. In those 15 seconds, a machine gun that she had been about to target opened fire and hit a group of Marines who were moving between vehicles. She heard the screams through her scope when she rolled back into position. 2 men down, maybe 3, because she had moved, because she had to protect herself. Elena felt something crack inside her chest. Not bone, something deeper. The weight of knowing that every second she spent staying alive was a second she wasn't spending keeping them alive. She found the machine gun. She fired. The gunner dropped. She swung the rifle toward the position where the rounds had come from behind her and fired twice into the rocks. She didn't know if she hit anyone. She didn't have time to check. Back to the Western Ridge. Another target. Fire chamber. Another. Fire 26 rounds, 27. Captain Oakes had finally gotten through to battalion on a secondary frequency. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes was on the other end, and he was not happy. "Oakes, I have an unauthorized call sign on my net claiming to be one of your communications sergeants. Call sign Ghost 17. She called in the ambush 20 minutes before it happened." "Explain." Oakes felt the blood drain from his face. "Say again, sir." "Ghost 17, Sergeant Cruz. She warned us about the ambush, Oakes. She called it on the tactical net, and someone in your TOC told her to clear the frequency. Did you know about this? Oakes didn't answer. He didn't have to. Barnes could hear the gunfire, the explosions, the screaming. The answer was lying all around them in blood and burning metal. Sir, Oakes said, and his voice sounded like a man who had just realized he had made the worst mistake of his life. Sir, she briefed me yesterday. She had intercept data. She said the basin was a kill zone. And what did you do with that information, Captain? The silence on the radio lasted 3 seconds. It felt like 3 years. I dismissed it, sir. Barnes didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was controlled in the way that only truly furious men can manage. Get your Marines out of that basin, Oakes. Get them out now. And when this is over, you and I are going to have a conversation that you are not going to enjoy. The radio went dead. Oakes sat there for a moment, his back against the tire of a destroyed Humvee, the sounds of combat raging around him. He thought about the briefing room. He thought about Elena standing at the back holding her papers, trying to tell him something that would have saved all of this. He thought about the laughter. And for the first time in his career, Captain Oakes felt something he had never felt before. Shame. Then a mortar round hit 10 meters from his position, and shame became survival again. He grabbed Ramirez, threw him over his shoulder, and ran north toward Vega's moving perimeter. On the eastern ridge, Elena was down to her last magazine. 12 rounds. She had fired 31 times and hit 28 targets. She had single-handedly dismantled the Western Ridge's offensive capability by nearly 40%. She had killed or wounded more enemy fighters in 30 minutes than most infantry platoons engaged in a full day of combat, and she was about to run out of ammunition. The fighters behind her had gone quiet after the grenade and the 2 blind shots into the rocks, but she knew they were regrouping. She could feel them out there circling, trying to find an angle. She had minutes, maybe less. She looked through her scope one more time. The Marines were moving now, flowing north through the basin in a ragged but determined column. Vega was at the front, waving men forward. Oakes was in the middle, carrying Ramirez. Fire teams were laying down suppressive fire on both ridgelines, and for the first time since the ambush started, the Marines were giving more than they were getting. They were going to make it. Not all of them, not without scars that would never heal. But they were going to make it out of that basin alive. Because of her. Elena fired her 32nd round and dropped an RPG gunner who had been lining up a shot on the lead element. She chambered her 33rd round and swung the scope south, looking for the greatest remaining threat. That's when she saw him. On the western ridge at the very end of the enemy line, a man was standing in the open, not hiding, not taking cover, standing. He had a radio in one hand and binoculars in the other, and he was scanning the eastern ridge with slow, deliberate movements. He was looking for her. And as Elena watched through her scope, the man lowered his binoculars and spoke into his radio. She couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She had been reading body language through a scope since she was 12 years old. She knew what a command looked like. He was redirecting his remaining fighters, all of them, toward her position. Elena settled the crosshair on his chest. The range was 1,200 meters, further than she had ever shot before, further than the rifle was designed to perform reliably. The wind at that distance would push the round at least 18 inches, maybe more. She adjusted the scope. She calculated the hold. She placed her finger on the trigger. She breathed in. She breathed out. She held. And Elena Cruz took the longest shot of her life. The round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. Elena didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She watched through the scope as the bullet carved an invisible arc across 1,200 meters of open air, fighting gravity, fighting wind, fighting every law of physics that said this shot was impossible. The man with the radio didn't move. He was still talking, still commanding, still believing he was untouchable at that distance. The round hit him just below the left collarbone. He spun sideways, the radio flying from his hand, his legs folding under him like wet cloth. He hit the ground and didn't get back up. Elena exhaled. Her hands were trembling now, not from fear, from adrenaline that had been building for 40 minutes with nowhere to go. 34 rounds, 34 triggers old, 29 confirmed kills, and she had 8 rounds left. On the western ridge, something broke. Not a position, not a weapon. Something in the fighters themselves. Elena could see it through her scope, the way men look when they realize their leadership is gone. Heads turning, voices shouting without direction. Fighters who had been holding their positions with discipline were now looking at each other, waiting for an order that would never come. The man she had just killed wasn't just a commander. He was the commander, the one holding everything together. And now the thread was cut. Lena didn't celebrate. She shifted the rifle south and started scanning for remaining threats because the Marines were still in the basin and still moving and still dying. 0714. 44 minutes since the first RPG hit the lead vehicle. 44 minutes that felt like 44 years. On the basin floor, Staff Sergeant Vega was covered in someone else's blood. He didn't know whose. He had stopped caring. All that mattered was the gap at the north end of the basin, 200 meters ahead, where the walls spread apart and there was room to breathe. "Keep moving," he screamed. "Do not stop. If you stop, you die." A young corporal named Medina was dragging a wounded Marine by the collar of his plate carrier. The wounded man's legs were shattered below the knees, both of them, and he was leaving a red trail in the dust. Medina was crying, not sobbing, just tears running down his face while his body did the work his mind couldn't process. "Medina, pardon." Vega grabbed the other side of the wounded man's carrier. "I got him. Keep moving with me." They dragged him together, hunched over, rounds snapping overhead. A burst of machine gun fire kicked dirt into Vega's face. He flinched but didn't stop. Then the machine gun went silent mid-burst like someone had flipped a switch. Another one. Vega looked up at the eastern ridge. He still couldn't see anyone up there. No muzzle flash, no movement. Just silence from enemy positions that should have been killing them. "Who the hell is up there?" Medina gasped. "An angel," Vega said. He didn't know why he said it, it just came out. They reached the north gap and pulled the wounded Marine behind a rock formation that offered cover from both ridgelines. A Navy corpsman named Davis was already there working on 3 casualties, at once his hands moving with the mechanical speed of a man who had stopped thinking and was running purely on training. "Davis, I got another one," Vega said. "Both legs." Davis didn't look up. "Put him against the rock, tourniquet both thighs. I'll get to him in 90 seconds. "He doesn't have 90 seconds. "Then you do it, Staff Sergeant." "I've got a sucking chest wound and a femoral bleed, and I have 2 hands. Vega dropped to his knees and pulled the tourniquet from the wounded Marine's own kit. He had done this 100 times in training. His hands knew the movements. Strap high and tight, twist the windlass, lock it down. The wounded man screamed. Vega did the other leg. The man screamed again and then went quiet, his eyes rolling back. "Stay with me, Marine," Vega said. "That's an order." The man's eyes came back. Barely. Vega stood up and looked south down the basin. Marines were still moving, still flowing north in small groups, fire teams covering each other as they bounded between disabled vehicles. The discipline was holding, barely, but it was holding. And then a mortar round landed in the middle of a squad that was crossing an open stretch between 2 burning trucks. 3 men went down, 2 of them didn't move. Vega grabbed his radio. "All elements mortars are still active. Move in pairs, keep spread out, do not bunch up." He heard Oakes on the net breathing hard, his voice ragged. "Vega, I'm 300 meters south with about 40 Marines. We're pinned by a heavy gun on the western ridge. Can your guys put fire on it?" "Sir, I don't have a line of sight from here. But whoever is on the eastern ridge might." "What do you mean, whoever is on the eastern ridge?" "Sir, someone is up there. Someone has been systematically taking out enemy positions for the last 30 minutes. I don't know who it is. Nobody seems to know." Oakes was quiet for a moment. Then he said very softly, "Cruz." "Sir." "It's Cruz. It's the comm sergeant. Ghost 17. She tried to warn us, and when we didn't listen, she went up there herself." Vega let that sink in. The desk girl, the radio operator, the woman they had laughed out of a briefing room. She was the reason half his Marines were still breathing. "Sir," Vega said, "whatever she's doing, it's working. But she's alone up there, and she's got to be running low on ammo. We need to get our guys moving faster." "Working on it, Vega. That heavy gun has us locked down." Vega turned to Corporal Hayes. "Hayes, I need a SMAW team, now." "We lost both SMAW gunners in the initial hit, Staff Sergeant." "Then find me someone who knows how to point a rocket at a ridgeline and pull a trigger." "I'll do it," said a voice behind them. Vega turned. It was Dawson, the 19-year-old kid whose hands had been shaking so badly he couldn't grip his rifle an hour ago. He was standing straight now. His hands were steady, His eyes were clear and hard in a way that they hadn't been before the ambush. Dawson, have you ever fired a SMA? I cross-trained on it at Pendleton. I can do it. Vega looked at him for a long moment. He saw something in that kid's face that he had seen in his own face years ago in a different country and a different war. The moment a boy decides to stop being scared and start being dangerous. Get the launcher. It's on the second disabled vehicle passenger side. Hayes, cover him. Dawson moved without hesitation. He sprinted across 15 meters of open ground, rounds cracking around him, and dove behind the disabled Humvee. He found the SMAW under a pile of debris and a dead man's legs. He pulled it free, checked the tube loaded around. Vega, where's the gun? Dawson shouted. Western Ridge, 2 o'clock from your position, about 600 meters. You'll see the muzzle flash. Dawson waited. 3 seconds. 5. Then the heavy gun opened up again, a long, chattering burst aimed at Oakes's group to the south. Dawson saw the flash. He stood up, shouldered the launcher, aimed, and fired. The rocket crossed the basin in just under 2 seconds and hit the rock face 3 meters below the machine gun position. The explosion sent stone and metal and bodies cartwheeling off the ridge. The gun went silent. Target destroyed, Dawson screamed, and for the first time in 48 minutes, Marines in the basin cheered. Oakes heard the explosion. He felt the pressure wave even at 300 meters, and when the heavy gun stopped firing, he didn't waste a single second. Move now, everybody north. His group surged forward, carrying their wounded, dragging their dead, running with the desperate energy of men who had just been given a second chance and knew it wouldn't last. On the eastern ridge, Elena heard the cheer. She heard it through the scope, through the chaos, through the ringing in her ears from 40 minutes of sustained rifle fire. She heard Marines cheering, and something inside her cracked open, not pain, not relief, something she didn't have a name for. But she couldn't stop. Not yet. She had 6 rounds left. 6. And there were still active positions on the western ridge. Fewer now, much fewer, but enough to kill. She found a mortar team that was adjusting its aim toward the North Gap, where the Marines were consolidating. If that mortar started dropping rounds on the web, it would be catastrophic. All those Marines clustered together with nowhere to go. Elena fired. The round hit the mortar tube itself, a shot so precise it would have been called impossible by anyone who hadn't spent their childhood shooting with Hector Cruz in a field behind a house in Odessa, Texas. The tube split. The crew scattered. 5 rounds left. Behind her, the fighters on the eastern slope had regrouped. She could hear them again, closer than before. They had figured out her approximate position from the sound of her rifle. They were working their way up through the rocks, maybe 3 or 4 of them, and they were being smart about it this time. No talking, no bunching up, just quiet, methodical movement. Elena had 1 grenade left. She had to make a choice. Use it now when she couldn't see them and hope for the best, or wait until they were close enough to be certain and risk being shot before she could throw it. She waited. The sound of a boot on rock, close, maybe 40 meters. Elena rolled right away from her shooting position, pulling the grenade from her carrier as she moved. She saw a shadow rise from behind a boulder below her, a man rifle up searching. She pulled the pin and threw, not over her shoulder this time. She threw it directly at the shadow, a hard overhand throw that sent the grenade bouncing off the boulder and into the gap where the man was standing. The explosion was close enough to ring her ears like a bell. Dust and rock fragments peppered her face. She heard a scream, short and sharp, and then the sound of a body sliding down loose rock. But there were more. She heard them moving faster now, no longer trying to be quiet. They knew where she was, and they were coming. Elena grabbed the rifle and rolled back to her shooting position. She had to make a decision, and she had to make it now. 5 rounds for the western ridge where Marines were still in danger, or 5 rounds for the men who were about to kill her. She chose the Marines. She found a target on the western ridge, a fighter repositioning to get an angle on the North Gap. She fired. He dropped. 4 rounds. Gunfire erupted behind her. Rounds smacked the rocks around her position, sending chips of stone into her face and arms. She felt a sharp burn across her left shoulder. Not a direct hit, a graze, but deep enough to draw blood immediately. Elena didn't turn around. She found another target. Fired. 3 rounds. More gunfire from behind, closer. She felt an impact on her plate carrier in the back, a round hitting the ceramic plate. The force slammed her chest into the rock and drove the air from her lungs. She gasped, tasted dirt, tasted blood. She couldn't breathe. For 5 seconds, she couldn't breathe. The world went gray at the edges. She heard her father's voice, distant now, fading. Control the breath, mija. Elena forced air into her lungs. 1 breath, 2. The gray retreated. She rolled over and faced the threat behind her for the first time. 2 fighters 30 meters away, scrambling up the rocks toward her position. She could see their faces, young, determined, scared. Elena raised the rifle and fired from her back, an impossible position. No support, no stability, just instinct and 10,000 hours of practice that lived in her muscles even when her mind was screaming. The first round hit the lead fighter in the chest. He fell backward into the man behind him. The second fighter stumbled, pushed the body aside, raised his weapon. Elena chambered and fired again. The round caught him in the throat. He dropped his rifle and grabbed his neck with both hands and sat down on the rocks like a man sitting down to rest, and then he toppled sideways and was still. 2 rounds left. Elena lay on her back, staring at the sky, bleeding from her shoulder, her chest aching from the plate. Impact, her ears ringing so loudly she could barely hear the gunfire still echoing through the basin below. She rolled back to her shooting position. She pressed her eye to the scope. Her vision was blurry from dust and sweat and tears. She didn't realize she was crying. She scanned the western ridge. The firing had almost stopped. The positions she had been targeting for nearly an hour were mostly silent. Bodies, abandoned weapons, empty holes. The few remaining fighters were pulling back, retreating off the reverse slope of the ridge, melting away from a fight they no longer believed they could win. On the basin floor, the last of the Marines were reaching the North Gap. Vega was counting heads. Oakes was on the radio with Barnes reporting the situation in a voice that sounded like it belonged to a man 20 years older than he was. 0738, 98 minutes since the ambush began. 98 minutes that had changed everything. Elena lowered the rifle. She rested her forehead against the stock. The metal was hot from an hour of sustained firing. It burned her skin and she didn't care. She had 2 rounds left. She had fired 38 shots. She had killed 31 enemy fighters from a position that nobody had assigned, using a weapon that nobody had given her, executing a mission that nobody had authorized. And 480 Marines were alive because of it. Not all of them. She knew that. She had seen men fall. She had seen men who didn't get back up. The number would be smaller than 480 when the final count came in. But it would be a number, not 0, not the 0 it would have been if she had followed orders and stayed at her desk. Elena reached for her canteen. It was empty. She had forgotten to drink. For nearly 2 hours, she had forgotten to eat, drink, rest, or do anything that a human body needs to survive. The adrenaline had carried her. Now it was leaving, draining out of her like water from a cracked vessel, and everything hurt. Her shoulder where the round had grazed her. Her chest where the plate had stopped a bullet meant for her spine. Her right eye swollen and half closed from the constant pressure of the scope. Her hands raw from the rock, bleeding from cuts she didn't remember getting. She tried to stand and her legs buckled. She went down to one knee and stayed there, breathing hard, the rifle across her thighs. The radio on her hip crackled, a voice she didn't recognize. Ghost 17, this is Warhorse Main Actual. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes, do you copy? Wow. Elena picked up the handset. Her voice came out as a croak. Warhorse Main, Ghost 17, copies. Cruz, I need a sit rep on your position. Are you wounded? Minor wounds, sir. I'm functional. Are there remaining threats in your area? Elena looked around. The fighters who had been climbing toward her were dead. The western ridge was silent. The sound of gunfire in the basin had dropped to scattered pops, the cleanup sounds of a battle that was ending. Negative, sir. My immediate area is clear. Cruz, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not move from your position. I am sending a quick reaction force to extract you. They will be there in 20 minutes. Do you understand? Yes, sir. And Cruz. Sir. Barnes paused. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The command tone was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something that sounded like a man choosing his words with extreme care, because he knew they mattered more than anything he had said in a very long time. What you did today should not have been necessary, but it was, and I will not forget it. The radio went silent. Elena set the handset down. She sat on the ridge alone, surrounded by spent brass and blood-stained rocks. Below her in the basin, she could hear the Marines beginning to organize. Medevac helicopters were inbound, their distant thrum growing louder by the second. Voices were shouting orders, calling names, searching for the living among the dead. She looked at her hands. They were steady now. Perfectly steady, the way they had always been when she held a rifle. The way they had been when her father first put a weapon in them and told her she was going to be something special. Elena Cruz closed her eyes, and for the first time in 98 minutes, she allowed herself to feel afraid. Not afraid of what had happened, afraid of what came next. She had disobeyed a direct order. She had stolen a weapon from the armory. She had left her post without authorization. She had used a restricted tactical frequency without clearance. In the Marine Corps, any one of those offenses could end a career. All four together could mean a court-martial. She had saved 480 Marines, and the reward for that might be a prison cell. Elena opened her eyes. She picked up the rifle. She checked the chamber out of habit. 2 rounds. She removed the magazine, cleared the weapon, and set it beside her on the rock. Then she sat in the silence and waited for the men who were coming to either thank her or arrest her. She honestly didn't know which it would be. The helicopter landed at 0811. Elena heard it before she saw it. The heavy chop of rotors beating the air, pushing dust and grit across the ridge in a wave that stung her open wounds. She didn't stand up. She couldn't. Her legs had stopped cooperating somewhere around the 5-minute mark of sitting still, and the adrenaline that had kept her body functioning for nearly 2 hours had left behind nothing but pain and exhaustion. So deep, it felt like her bones were dissolving. 4 Marines came over the ridge in a tactical spread, weapons up, scanning for threats. The point man saw Elena first. He stopped. His weapon dipped slightly, not all the way down, but enough to tell her he wasn't sure what he was looking at. "Sergeant Cruz," he called out. "That's me." He came forward and knelt beside her. His name tape said Reeves. He was a sergeant, maybe 25, and his face had the particular expression of a man who had been told something unbelievable and was now looking at the proof. "Ma'am, we're here to extract you. Can you walk?" "Don't call me ma'am. I work for a living." Elena tried to smile. It came out as a grimace. "And no, I don't think I can walk. My legs are done." Reeves looked at the scene around her, the spent brass scattered across the rock. The rifle with its bolt locked back on an empty chamber. The blood hers and others smeared across the stone. The bodies of the 2 fighters she had killed at 30 meters still lying on the slope below. "How many?" Reeves asked. He wasn't asking about the bodies on the slope. He was asking about all of them. 31 confirmed, maybe more. I lost count toward the end. Reeves stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to his team. "Get a litter up here. She's coming off this ridge like a queen." "I don't need a litter," Elena said. "Sergeant Cruz, with all due respect, you just fought a 1-woman war for 2 hours. You're getting a litter." They carried her down the ridge and loaded her onto the helicopter. As it lifted off, Elena looked out the open door at Cara Basin below. The basin was scarred with burning vehicles and black smoke and the movement of hundreds of Marines reorganizing in the aftermath. Medevac birds were landing and taking off in a constant rotation. She could see the wounded being loaded. She could see shapes on the ground covered with ponchos, the shapes that wouldn't be loaded, the shapes that were going home in aluminum boxes. Elena counted the ponchos. She counted 11. Then the helicopter banked, and she couldn't see them anymore. 11 out of 480. 11 was a tragedy. 11 families destroyed. 11 funerals. 11 folded flags. But 11 was not 480. The helicopter flew her back to the forward operating base. A medical team was waiting on the landing pad. They put her on a stretcher and rushed her to the field hospital, a tent with bright lights and the smell of antiseptic and blood that made Elena's stomach clench. A Navy doctor named Callahan cut away her shirt and examined the shoulder wound. He was quiet for a long time. "Through and through graze," he said. "Deep enough to scar, but it missed the deltoid. You're lucky." "I don't feel lucky." "You've also got significant bruising on your posterior thorax from a plate strike." "Did you take a round in the back?" "Yes." "While you were shooting?" "Yes." Callahan shook his head. "I've been treating combat injuries for 12 years. I have never seen someone take a round in the back from behind and keep engaging targets in front of them. That's not training. That's something else." Elena didn't answer. She closed her eyes while Callahan cleaned and stitched the shoulder wound. She was starting to feel things she hadn't allowed herself to feel on the ridge. Not just physical pain, the other kind. The kind that comes when the body stops fighting and the mind starts remembering. She remembered the squad that had got hit by the mortar round in the open. The 15 seconds she had been forced to move to protect herself, the 15 seconds that had cost those men their lives. She could have been faster. She could have been better. She could have found that mortar team sooner. She remembered the cheering, Marines cheering when Dawson took out the heavy gun. She had felt something break open inside her when she heard that sound, and now she knew what it was. It was the wall she had built between herself and the reality of what she was doing. Every trigger pull, every body that dropped, every life she ended. She had walled it off because she had to, and now the wall was crumbling. "You're shaking," Callahan said. "I know. That's normal. Your body's processing." "I know what it is, Doc." Callahan wrapped her shoulder and gave her an IV for dehydration. He told her to rest. She told him she would try. They both knew she was lying. 09:45, an hour and a half after the extraction. Elena was sitting on a cot in the field hospital, her arm in a sling and IV bag hanging from a pole beside her, when Staff Sergeant Vega walked through the tent flap. He was filthy, blood on his uniform, dust caked in the creases of his face. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, the eyes of a man who had seen things that morning that would follow him for the rest of his life. He stopped at the foot of her cot. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just stood there looking at her, his jaw working like he was chewing on words that wouldn't come out. "Vega," Elena said. "I looked away," he said. Elena blinked. "What?" "In the briefing room, when you tried to warn us, when Oakes shut you down, you looked at me, you looked right at me because you thought I would back you up, and I looked away." His voice cracked on the last word, not dramatically, not like a movie, just a small fracture, the kind that happens when a man who has spent 14 years being hard finally hits something he can't be hard about. "Vega, you couldn't have known." "I did know. That's the problem, Cruz. I sat in that briefing and I looked at that map and I thought the same thing you thought. Cara Basin is a death trap. Any idiot can see it. But I kept my mouth shut because Oakes was talking and Intel had signed off, and I told myself it wasn't my place." He sat down on the cot across from hers. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. 11 dead crews, 23 wounded, 9 of them critical. That's on me, that's on Oakes, that's on every man in that room who laughed at you and then drove 480 Marines into a hole. It's not on you, Vega. It is. He looked up. But it would have been a lot worse. 480 dead instead of 11. If you hadn't done what you did, and what you did should have been done by people like me. It should have been planned. It should have been authorized. There should have been a sniper team on that ridge with proper support and comms and extraction. Instead, there was you, one woman with a stolen rifle, because nobody listened. Elena didn't know what to say, so she said the only thing that felt true. "You would have done the same thing." "I don't know if I would have," Vega said, "and that's going to haunt me for a long time." He stood up. He extended his hand. Elena took it. His grip was fierce, almost painful, the grip of a man making a promise without words. "Whatever happens next," Vega said, "I'm in your corner, you need to know that." He turned and walked out of the tent without looking back. Elena watched him go. Then she lay back on the cot and stared at the canvas ceiling and tried to prepare herself for what was coming. It came at 1100 hours. 2 military police officers entered the field hospital. They were clean, pressed uniforms, polished boots. They looked like they belonged in a different war than the one Elena had just fought. "Sergeant Cruz." "Yes." "Ma'am, you are being placed under administrative hold pending investigation into multiple violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You are to remain in this facility until further notice. You are not to communicate with any member of the battalion without authorization. Do you understand?" Elena looked at them. She looked at their clean uniforms and their polished boots and their faces that had never been pressed against a hot rifle stock while men died below them. "I understand," she said. "Do you wish to make a statement at this time?" "No. An attorney will be appointed to represent you. You will be informed of the specific charges once the investigation is complete." They posted a guard outside her section of the tent. Not handcuffs, not a cell, but close enough. The message was clear. You saved 480 Marines and we're going to punish you for it. Elena sat on her cot and felt the weight of it settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. She had known this was coming. She had calculated it before she ever left the wire. She had weighed her career against their lives and made her choice with open eyes. But knowing and feeling are different animals. 1,200 hours. The base was in chaos. Medevac flights continued. Families back home were being notified. Reports were being written. And somewhere in the command structure, people were starting to ask very uncomfortable questions about how an entire battalion had been driven into a confirmed kill zone. Captain Oakes was in the TOC writing his after-action report. He had been writing it for 2 hours and he was still on the first page because every sentence he wrote made him feel sick. He couldn't describe the ambush without describing the warning he had ignored. He couldn't describe Elena's warning without describing the laughter. He couldn't describe the laughter without admitting that he had led it. Lieutenant Hargrove walked in. He looked like he had aged 10 years and 10 hours. "Sir, battalion commander is on his way. ET, 30 minutes. Oakes nodded without looking up. "Sir." Hargrove hesitated. "I need to tell you something." "Not now, Hargrove." "She came to me too, Cruz, after the briefing. She came to me with her intercept data and I told her to stay in her lane." "I told her that, sir. I used those exact words." Oakes stopped writing. He set his pen down. He looked at Hargrove and saw the same thing that he saw in his own reflection every time he passed a mirror. A man who had failed at the one thing that mattered most in military leadership: listening. "We all failed her, Hargrove, every one of us." "What's going to happen to her?" "They've got her under administrative hold. MPs posted outside her tent. They're going to court-martial her." "They might." Hargrove's face twisted. "That's insane, sir. She saved the entire convoy." "She also stole a weapon, abandoned her post, disobeyed direct orders, and used an unauthorized radio frequency. The UCMJ doesn't have a clause for, but she was right." Hargrove stared at him. "So we get to be wrong, and she gets punished for being right. That's the system." Oakes didn't answer. He picked up his pen and went back to his report, writing words that tasted like ash. 1,300 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes arrived by helicopter. He didn't go to the TOC first. He didn't go to the command post. He went straight to the field hospital. The MP at Elena's section snapped to attention. Barnes waved him aside and stepped through the curtain. Elena was sitting on her cot, legs crossed, staring at the wall. She started to stand when she saw the silver oak leaves on his collar. Barnes held up a hand. "Stay seated, Sergeant. You've earned the right to sit." He pulled a folding chair from the corner and sat down across from her. He was in his 50s, lean and hard, with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that came from 25 years of making decisions that got people killed or kept them alive. "I'm going to ask you some questions," he said. "You don't have to answer without your attorney present, but I'm not here to build a case against you. I'm here because I need to understand what happened today, and you're the only person who can tell me." Elena studied his face. She had spent her career reading people intercepting not just radio signals, but the signals that people gave off when they talked, the micro-expressions that told you whether someone was lying or afraid or genuinely trying to help. Barnes wasn't lying. He wasn't performing. He was a commander who had almost lost an entire battalion and wanted to know why. "Ask your question, sir. When did you first identify the threat in Carabasin?" 3 weeks ago. The chatter on the Eastern frequency changed pattern. I started logging it separately from routine intercepts. "Did you report it through the intelligence chain?" "I tried, sir. Intelligence told me I was outside my area of responsibility. Communications section doesn't generate threat assessments." "So you went to the operational briefing?" "I wasn't supposed to be there. I was delivering comm reports. But I heard Captain Oakes describe the mission, and I recognized the terrain from the intercepts. I spoke up." "And you were dismissed?" "Yes, sir. Captain Oakes said intelligence had cleared the corridor. Lieutenant Hargrove told me to stay in my lane. I went to 5 other officers and senior NCOs after that. None of them would listen." Barnes leaned forward. "Why not?" The question hung in the air. It was simple. It was devastating. And Elena knew the answer, had always known it, but saying it out loud in front of a lieutenant colonel felt like pulling a pin on a different kind of grenade. "Because I'm a communications sergeant, sir. Because I'm not intelligence, and I'm not operations, and I'm not infantry. Because in the Marine Corps, your MOS defines what you're allowed to think. And nobody in that briefing room believed that a comms Marine could see something that their entire intelligence apparatus had missed. She paused. Then she added the part she almost didn't say. And because I'm a woman, sir, I won't pretend that wasn't part of it. Barnes held her gaze. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. Tell me about the rifle, he said. M40A5 from the armory, assigned to a sniper team that rotated out, unaccounted for. You stole it. Yes, sir, I stole it. Have you been trained on that weapon system? Not formally, but I qualified expert on every weapon in my training pipeline, including the M40. I was recommended for Scout Sniper School by Master Sergeant Colvin 3 years ago. The recommendation was never processed. Barnes's expression shifted. Something changed behind his eyes, something sharp and angry, though not at her. Who was responsible for processing that recommendation? I don't know, sir. I followed up twice and was told it was in the system. Then I was reassigned to comms, and the subject was dropped. Barnes was quiet for a long time. He looked at Elena's hands, the bandaged cuts, the raw skin, the fingers that had pulled a trigger 38 times and hit the target 31. He looked at her shoulder wrapped in gauze. He looked at the IV in her arm. Sergeant Cruz, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it clearly. What you did today was a violation of multiple articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. You abandoned your post. You stole government property. You disobeyed direct orders. You operated on a restricted frequency without authorization. Any one of those offenses can result in a court-martial and a dishonorable discharge. Elena's stomach turned to ice. She had known it, but hearing it laid out one offense after another made it real in a way that knowing hadn't. However, Barnes continued, and the word hit like a thunderclap in the small space. I also have 469 Marines who are alive right now because of what you did. I have an after-action analysis that shows your actions reduced enemy combat effectiveness by an estimated 40% within the first 30 minutes of contact. I have a confirmed kill count that exceeds the combined output of 3 infantry platoons. And I have a 1,200-meter shot that took out the enemy's operational commander, a shot that our best trained snipers would call exceptional. He leaned back in his chair. So here's what's going to happen. The investigation will proceed. That's mandatory. I can't stop it, and I wouldn't if I could because the system needs to understand what happened here and why. But I can influence the context in which that investigation takes place. What does that mean, sir? It means I'm going to make sure every person in the chain of command who ignored your warning is sitting in the same hot seat you're sitting in right now. It means Captain Oakes will answer for dismissing actionable intelligence. It means the intelligence section will answer for failing to identify a 200 fighter staging area that a communications sergeant found with a radio and a map. And it means your sniper school recommendation, the one that was never processed, is going to become a very important piece of this story. Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope, something quieter, something that felt like being seen for the first time. Sir, I don't want anyone to suffer for this. I made my choice. I'll accept the consequences. Barnes stood up. He looked down at her with an expression that was equal parts respect and sadness. Cruz, the consequences you should be accepting are a commendation and a transfer to a unit that deserves you, not a court-martial. The fact that those two things are even in the same conversation tells me something is deeply broken in the way this battalion operates, and I intend to fix it. He walked to the curtain and stopped. One more thing. Your call sign, Ghost 17. Did you choose that? No, sir. It was assigned to the comms position. It was just the default. Barnes almost smiled. Not quite, but close. Ghost, the invisible one, the one nobody could see. He shook his head slowly. Well, Sergeant Cruz, they can see you now. He stepped through the curtain and was gone. Elena sat alone in the quiet. Outside the tent, she could hear the base operating at full speed, the organized chaos of a unit dealing with mass casualties and the political fallout that follows a catastrophic intelligence failure. She could hear helicopters and engines and voices shouting and the distant sound of someone crying a raw, broken sound that could have been anyone. She looked at her hands again. The hands that had killed 31 men. The hands that had saved 469. The same hands that had held her father's hand in a hospital room in Odessa, Texas, while he told her she was going to be something special. She wondered what Hector would say if he could see her now. Sitting in a field hospital under guard decorated and accused in the same breath, the most invisible Marine in the battalion turned into the most visible woman in the entire theater of operations. She thought he would have said the same thing he always said, the same thing he said when she missed her first shot, the same thing he said when she made her first kill on a deer at 200 yards, the same thing he said on the last night of his life when the cancer had taken everything except his voice and his eyes and the love in both. I knew it, mija. I always knew. Elena Cruz lay back on the cot and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 26 hours, she had nothing to do. No radios to monitor, no intercepts to analyze, no rifles to steal, no ridges to climb, no impossible shots to take. She had only herself, her choices, and the silence that follows the kind of day that divides a life into before and after. Sleep came hard and fast like a round to the chest, and she didn't fight it. And in her dreams, she was 12 years old again, standing in a field behind a house in Odessa, and her father was beside her, and the rifle was light in her hands, and he was saying, "Breathe, mija, just breathe," and the world was simple, and the target was clear, and nothing had gone wrong yet, and nothing ever would. Elena woke to the sound of arguing. Not distant arguing, close. Right outside her section of the tent, voices she recognized cutting through the canvas like knives. "You are not going in there, Staff Sergeant. She is under administrative hold, and that means no unauthorized visitors." "I'm not a visitor, I'm a witness. And unless you want to explain to Lieutenant Colonel Barnes why you obstructed a witness from delivering testimony, I suggest you step aside." Vega. That was Vega's voice. And the other voice belonged to the MP, the same clean uniformed kid who had been posted at her curtain since yesterday. "Staff Sergeant, my orders are clear. No one in or out without authorization from the investigating officer." "Your orders are about to get a whole lot more complicated, Corporal, because there are about 30 Marines behind me who walked out of that basin alive because of the woman in that tent, and every single one of them wants to make a statement. Now you can let me through, or you can try to stop all of us. Your call." Silence. Then the sound of boots stepping aside. Vega came through the curtain. He wasn't alone. Corporal Hayes was behind him. Then Dawson. Then Medina. Then faces Elena didn't recognize, Marines she had never spoken to, men and women she had only seen through a rifle scope, as small figures running for their lives on a basin floor 1,000 meters below. They filed in one by one, filling the small space around her cot until there was no room left to stand. Nobody spoke for a long moment. They just looked at her, this woman sitting on a hospital cot with a bandaged shoulder and dark circles under her eyes and an IV line still taped to her arm. Dawson spoke first, the 19-year-old, the kid who had fired the SMAW. His voice was steady, but his chin was trembling. "Sergeant Cruz, I want you to know something. When the ambush hit, I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Staff Sergeant Vega had to grab my face and tell me to fight. But the reason I'm standing here right now is because every time a gun was about to kill us, it went quiet. Every time. And that was you. I didn't know it then, but I know it now, and I want you to hear me say it. You saved my life." Elena opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Medina stepped forward. His eyes were raw and swollen. He had been crying recently, or maybe he hadn't stopped since the basin. "I was dragging Corporal Reese. Both his legs were gone below the knee. A machine gun had us zeroed, and I knew we were dead. I knew it the way you know the sun is hot. There was no cover. There was no time. And then the gun stopped, just stopped, mid-burst, like God reached down and turned it off." His voice broke. "That wasn't God, that was you. And Reese is in surgery right now, and the doctors say he's going to live because he got to the corpsman in time, because you bought us the time." One by one they spoke. Hayes told her about the moment the heavy gun went silent and his fire team was able to move for the first time in 20 minutes. A sergeant named Polk told her about watching an RPG team get taken out seconds before they fired on a vehicle carrying 8 wounded Marines. A lance corporal, whose name Elena never caught, told her he had called his mother that morning and told her he loved her because he didn't think he would get another chance. And now he was going to call her again and tell her about the woman who made it possible. Elena sat through all of it. She didn't cry. She was past crying. She was in the place beyond tears where everything is just sensation and presence. And the raw fact of being alive in a room full of people who are alive because of something you did. When the last Marine finished speaking, Vega looked at Elena and said, "We're all writing statements. Every one of us. 32 statements describing what happened in that basin and what you did from that ridge. Those statements are going to the investigating officer, the battalion commander, and the Marine Corps Inspector General. If they want to court-martial you, they're going to have to court-martial you in front of every Marine who was there. Vega, you don't have to do this. You didn't have to do what you did either. But here we are. They left the way they came, one by one, filing past the MP, who refused to make eye contact with any of them. Dawson was the last to go. He stopped at the curtain and turned back. Ghost 17, he said. That's what we're calling you now. All of us. That's your name. Then he was gone. Elena sat in the silence they left behind. She looked at the empty space where 32 Marines had stood and felt something shift in her chest, not the cracked thing from the ridge, not the broken thing from the hospital, but something new. Something that felt like it might hold weight. 1,400 hours. The investigating officer arrived. His name was Major Trent, a JAG lawyer with wire-rimmed glasses and a face that gave away nothing. He sat in Barnes's chair and opened the folder and looked at Elena the way lawyers look at evidence. Sergeant Cruz, I've reviewed the preliminary reports. I've listened to the radio recordings. I've examined the physical evidence from your position on the ridge, and I've received 32 written statements from members of the convoy. Yes, sir. I've also received statements from Captain Oakes, Lieutenant Hargrove, and 5 other officers and senior NCOs who confirmed that you attempted to warn them about the ambush prior to the convoy's departure. Yes, sir. Captain Oakes has submitted a supplemental statement accepting full responsibility for dismissing your intelligence assessment. He has requested that any disciplinary action be directed at him rather than at you. Elena blinked. She hadn't expected that. Oakes, the man who had laughed at her, the man who had told her to leave the briefing room. He was falling on his sword for her. That's not necessary, Elena said. Captain Oakes made a judgment call based on the intelligence available to him. He was wrong, but he wasn't malicious. Major Trent studied her over his glasses. That's a remarkably generous assessment given the circumstances. It's the truth, sir. I've been wrong before, too. The difference is that when I was wrong, nobody died. Trent closed the folder. He removed his glasses and cleaned them, the slow, deliberate gesture of a man buying himself time to think. Sergeant Cruz, I've been a military lawyer for 19 years. I've prosecuted cases ranging from desertion to murder. And in 19 years, I have never seen a case like yours. The facts are not in dispute. You violated multiple articles of the USMJ. That is clear. What is also clear is that your violations directly resulted in the survival of approximately 469 service members who would have otherwise been killed or critically wounded. He put his glasses back on. The Uniform Code of Military Justice does not have a provision for justified disobedience. It doesn't have a mechanism for weighing the lives saved against the rules broken. That is not a flaw in the system. It is a feature, because the moment we start allowing individuals to decide when orders can be ignored, we stop being a military and start being a mob. Elena's stomach sank. However, Trent continued, and for the second time in 2 days, that single word changed everything. The UCMJ also grants commanding officers broad discretion in determining how to handle violations. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes has reviewed the evidence and has made his recommendation to division. I've been authorized to inform you of the outcome. He opened a second folder, a thin one, single page. All charges related to the events of April 14th are being dropped. You will receive a formal letter of reprimand for unauthorized departure from your post, which will remain in your file for 1 year and then be expunged if no further violations occur. The theft of the M40A5 rifle has been reclassified as an emergency requisition under field conditions, which is within the discretionary authority of the battalion commander to approve retroactively. Elena stared at him. Sir, that's not how emergency requisitions work. No, it's not. But Lieutenant Colonel Barnes is a man who knows how to use paperwork as a weapon when he needs to. And right now, he needs to. Trent closed the folder and stood up. One more thing, your sniper school recommendation from 3 years ago, the one that was never processed. Barnes personally called the commandant of the Scout Sniper School at Quantico this morning. He described your performance in detail. The commandant's response, and I'm paraphrasing here, was that if you could do what you did with a stolen rifle and no formal training, he wanted you in his next class. Elena couldn't speak. Her throat had closed. 3 years. 3 years she had waited for that recommendation to go through. 3 years of filing follow-ups that went nowhere. 3 years of watching less qualified Marines get billets she deserved because the system had lost her paperwork or buried it, or simply decided she wasn't worth the effort. And now, because she had broken every rule the Marine Corps held sacred, the door she had been knocking on for 3 years had blown wide open. When she managed, next cycle starts in 6 weeks. Barnes is submitting your orders today. Trent extended his hand. Elena took it. Sergeant Cruz, for what it's worth, and I know this doesn't mean much coming from a lawyer, what you did on that ridge was the most extraordinary act of individual combat I have encountered in my career. I hope the Corps has the wisdom to recognize what it has in you. He left. The MP was no longer at the curtain. Nobody replaced him. Elena was free. She stood up for the first time in hours. Her legs shook, but they held. She pulled the IV from her arm, pressed a cotton ball to the spot, and walked out of the field hospital into the late afternoon. The base was different now. Not physically. Physically, it was the same dusty, ugly collection of tents and barriers and vehicles it had always been. But the way people looked at her was different. Marines she passed stopped what they were doing. Some nodded, some saluted, even though she was a sergeant and they were the same rank or higher. One lance corporal, a kid she had never seen before, snapped to attention as she walked by and said Ghost 17, like he was saying a prayer. She found Vega at the motor pool. He was supervising the repair of damaged vehicles, his hands black with grease, his face set in the permanent scowl of a man who deals with grief by working until he can't feel anything. Charges dropped, Elena said. Vega didn't look up from the engine he was inspecting. I know. Barnes told me an hour ago. Sniper school. Next cycle. Now Vega looked up. His scowl didn't change, but something behind it did. Something that might have been in a different man, a smile. It's about damn time. Vega, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. When have I ever been anything else? The 11, the ones we lost. Could I have done more? Vega put down his wrench. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked at her with the directness that had defined him for 14 years of service. No. There was a mortar team. I was 15 seconds late getting to them because I had to reposition. Those 15 seconds cost 3 Marines their lives. Cruz, listen to me. You were one person on a ridge with a bolt-action rifle and 40 rounds of ammunition against 200 fighters in prepared positions. You killed 31 of them and disrupted the entire ambush by yourself. If you had been 2 seconds slower on any shot, if you had missed one more time, if you had decided to save yourself instead of staying on the rifle when they were shooting at you from behind, the number wouldn't be 11 dead. It would be 480. I keep seeing them, the 3 who went down in the open. I know. I see them too. I see them every time I close my eyes, and I'm going to see them for the rest of my life. But I'm also going to see 469 Marines who went home because of you. That's the math, Cruz. It's ugly math. It's the ugliest math there is, but it's the right math. Elena nodded. She didn't feel better. She wouldn't feel better for a long time, maybe ever. But she understood. When do you leave for Quantico? Vega asked. 6 weeks. You're going to be the best shooter they've ever seen. I was already the best shooter they've ever seen. They just didn't know it. Vega looked at her for a long beat. Then he laughed. A real laugh, deep and rough, the kind that shakes the dust off a man's soul. Yeah, he said. Yeah, you were. That evening, Elena went to the communications tent for the last time. She sat down at her old console, the one she had sat at for 18 months, logging frequencies and filing reports that nobody read. The screen was dark. Her replacement had already been assigned. She reached into the drawer and pulled out the only personal item she kept there. A photograph, creased and faded, a man and a girl in a field. The man kneeling behind the girl, his hands over hers on a small rifle, both of them squinting into the sun. Hector and Elena. Odessa, Texas. She was 12 in that photo. He was 47. He had 13 years left to live, and neither of them knew it, and it didn't matter because in that moment, everything was perfect and complete. Elena held the photograph and let herself feel all of it. The grief, the pride, the anger, the love, the cost of being right when everyone else was wrong. The cost of being brave when everyone else was comfortable. The cost of being invisible in a world that only sees what it expects to see. She put the photograph in her breast pocket against her heart where it would stay for the rest of her career. She stood up and walked out of the communications tent. She didn't look back. 3 days later, Captain Oakes found her at the chow hall. He stood at the end of her table for a full minute before she acknowledged him. She made him wait because she needed him to feel what waiting felt like, even if it was only 60 seconds. "Cruz, can I sit?" "It's a free country, sir. That's what they tell me." He sat. He looked terrible. Thinner, grayer. His eyes had the flat, distant quality of a man who is being consumed by something he can't fight. I submitted my resignation. Elena set down her fork. "What?" "Barnes gave me the option. Resign or face a formal board of inquiry into the intelligence failure. I chose to resign." "Sir, you don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. 11 families are planning funerals right now because I laughed at the one person who could have prevented it. That's not something I get to walk away from with a slap on the wrist and a transfer to a desk somewhere. That's something I carry, and I carry it better as a civilian who knows what he did wrong than as an officer who got away with it." Elena studied him. She looked for the arrogance she had seen in the briefing room, the dismissiveness, the casual cruelty of a man who had made her small because it was easy. She didn't find it. It was gone, burned out of him in the same bar that had forged everything she had become. "I'm sorry, Cruz. That's what I came to say. I am sorry, not the kind of sorry that makes it okay. The kind of sorry that means I know it will never be okay, and I'm going to live with that for the rest of my life." Elena looked at him for a long time. She thought about the briefing room, the laughter, the mockery, the 11 Marines who would never come home. She thought about forgiveness and whether it was something she owed him or something he had to earn. "I hear you, sir," she said. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't condemnation. It was the truth, simple and complete. She heard him. Oakes nodded. He understood what she was giving him and what she wasn't. He stood up and walked away, and Elena watched him go and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, nothing. Because some things don't get resolved with conversation. Some things just get carried. 6 weeks later, Sergeant Elena Cruz reported to the Scout Sniper School at Marine Corps Base Quantico. She arrived with a duffel bag, a creased photograph in her breast pocket, and a reputation that had reached Quantico long before she did. The chief instructor, a master sergeant named Colvin, the same master sergeant Colvin who had written her original recommendation 3 years ago, met her at the door. "Cruz," he said, "I've been waiting for you." "I've been waiting for me too, Master Sergeant. I heard about Cara Basin." Everybody heard about Cara Basin. 31 kills, 1,200-meter shot on a command target, engaged and neutralized enemy fighters at close range while simultaneously providing overwatch for a 400-man convoy. He shook his head. "You did all of that with no spotter, no support, and no authorization." "That's correct, Master Sergeant." "Well, Sergeant Cruz, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is you're here. The bad news is you're going to have to do everything by the book this time." "Master Sergeant, I know the book. I've always known the book. I just needed someone to let me open it." Colvin looked at her the way her father used to look at her, not with pity, not with awe, with the quiet, steady recognition of one shooter seeing another. "Welcome to Sniper School, Ghost 17. Elena Cruz walked through the door. Behind her was a communications desk that nobody valued, a briefing room that laughed at her, a ridge where she killed 31 men and saved 469, a field hospital where they tried to punish her for being right, and a father who had told her a lifetime ago in a field in Odessa, Texas, that she was going to be something special. Ahead of her was everything she had earned, everything she had bled for, everything that the world had tried to deny her and failed. Sergeant Elena Cruz Ghost. 17 did not become a legend because the system worked. She became a legend because the system failed and she refused to let that failure kill 480 Marines. They called her invisible. They called her a desk girl. They told her to stay in her lane. She didn't stay in her lane. She climbed a ridge, she picked up a rifle, and she changed the math. That is not a story about disobedience. That is a story about what happens when the right person is in the wrong place and decides against every rule and every order and every voice telling her to sit down and be quiet to stand up anyway. Elena Cruz stood up, and 469 Marines went home because she did.